Fonus Square was more like a water park than just a square. There were multiple pools, and many underwater dwellers were swimming there. There was even a lazy river and water slides.
Did the prince say where he would be waiting in the square?
Boralk asked as he got off the boat and entered the square. Chris shook his head.
I was just told to come to Fonus Square.
I see, well, we should be able to meet him somewhere.
Boralk said, heading towards Fonus Square without showing any particular concern. Not only the underground dwellers but also the underwater dwellers seemed to be optimistic. While feeling anxious alone about whether things would be okay like that, Chris followed Boralk. However, finding Glenn and Almayan in the vast square filled with a large crowd turned out to be more challenging than expected. Chris grew increasingly frustrated, wondering why Glenn hadn't specified the location more clearly.
If I hadn't encountered Boralk, I might not have even been able to reach this square in the first place. Perhaps I could have been eaten by a monster like a Mosalia at the bottom of the sea.
Thinking about it that way, Glenn's one-sided and shallow suggestions seemed infuriating.
There's no point in just wandering around, so let's sit over there for a while.
Boralk said, pointing to the restaurant in the center of the square.
If we wait, he might notice us over here.
As soon as they sat down, the waitress came to take their order. Chris ordered the same coconut-flavored vinin as Boralk. In the pool right in front of the restaurant, a small boy was joyfully splashing around, soaring high into the air on the spray from the fountain. There was a man sitting far away, intently watching Chris as he gazed at the scene. He was a sturdy man with dark skin, dressed in a white Mao collar suit. Boralk, noticing the man's gaze, tapped Chris on the shoulder.
Who is that guy? Do you know him?
Boralk asked, directing his gaze towards the man in the Mao collar. Chris casually turned to look in the direction Boralk was facing. The moment he turned around, he made eye contact with the man, and Chris immediately looked away. The man was a man Chris had never seen before. Chris became anxious, wondering if he was part of a pirate crew and had come back for revenge.
What do you think? Do you know him?
Boralk asked again. Chris shook his head slightly while looking down.
Are you Chris?
Suddenly called out. Chris was taken aback in surprise. When he cautiously looked up, a man in a Mao collar was standing right in front of him. The man smiled and nodded when he confirmed the pendant that Chris was wearing around his neck.
I am Dalmia. I serve Prince Glenn. Due to certain circumstances, the prince and Almayan were unable to come here. Instead, I have come to greet you on their behalf.
The man who introduced himself as Dalmia clasped his hands in front of him and bowed in a manner reminiscent of a bellboy.
Is this your companion?
Dalmia asked, directing his gaze towards Boralk.
My name is Boralk. I'm the son of a blacksmith from the Wymelia district.
Boralk helped me when I was lost at the bottom of the sea and guided me here.
Chris immediately followed up after Boralk introduced himself.
I see.
Dalmia nodded with a smile still on his face.
Well, I wasn't informed that you had a companion. Will he be joining us?
Is that all right?
Hesitantly, Chris directed a pleading gaze. Chris was indeed a little uncomfortable to let Boralk leave without introducing him to Glenn after he had accompanied him all the way here.
It's no problem at all.
Dalmia smiled brightly again.
Will I get to meet the prince?
Boralk looked at Chris with excitement and joy. After leaving the restaurant, the two followed Dalmia's guidance and proceeded further into the square. The massive waterslide at the end of the lazy river twisted and turned like a snake, constantly changing its shape. At the end of the waterslide, a large hole, dug deep like a dam, opened its mouth. That height must be easily over 100 meters. An artificial waterfall, seemingly built for hydroelectric power, was flowing vigorously into that hole. In front of the waterfall, there was a line of people waiting their turn. When their turn came, they dove one after another into the pool beneath the waterfall.
We're going down from there.
Dalmia said, pointing at the waterfall. Chris couldn't believe his ears.
Are we going to jump into the waterfall?
Chris couldn't help but ask, and Dalmia nodded with a smile.
The sea below Kataralin connects to the exit of Kanarima, right?
Boralk asked from the side.
Exactly.
If so, we could just go down to the sea from Moral instead of going from Kataralin to reach the exit of Kanarima.
Barak said, pointing his left side. There was a long, narrow pool. Underneath the pool was a tunnel, like the one Chris and Boralk came up in on Mosaraya, leading to the bottom of the sea.
No, it's not that we are going out to seabed.
Dalmia said, without elaborating further, and continued walking towards the line. Chris asked Boralk, who had a stiff look next to him, "What's wrong?" Boralk shook his head and replied, "It's nothing." Then he hesitated and said, "It's just that."
Hey, what's wrong?
Chris asked, and Barak smiled awkwardly.
I'm just not good with heights.
I see. Even if he's underwater dweller, it seems there are still things he's not good at. Thinking that way, Chris became even more scared. As his turn drew closer, Chris felt so nervous his legs were about to give out. The sound of the waterfall's fierce drop was drowned out by the intense pounding of his heart in his ears.
Well, then, are you ready?
Without waiting for Chris to gather his resolve, it was already their turn.
Let's dive together. Please hold my hand.
Standing right above the waterfall, Dalmia reached out his hand towards Chris and Boralk. Chris and Boralk tightly grasped each of Dalmia's hands, clinging to them.
Let's go.
With a shout, Dalmia dove into the waterfall while still holding onto the hands of the two.